fabulous. Check this for a second. When your plastics, engine oil, factory waste, and fertilizer runoff end up in the sea, that's a real bad vibe. Trust me, gotta cut it out. We all have to stop that. And that's the memo right there.
This song is real, just like our ocean. Think ahead. Act now. Stop littering the land and protect our sea. Your garbage, your house, your garage, your factory, your move. It's that simple.
We're keepers of ocean and earth.
One Caribbean sea.
We're giving it all we own.
One economy.
We cherish the lands of our birth.
One Caribbean sea.
Our treasures of blue sky and sun.
One blue economy. One Caribbean sea. One blue economy. One Caribbean sea.
Our treasures of blue sky and sun.
One Caribbean sea.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this, our virtual staging of the Caribbean Youth for Climate Action Conference. My name is Janelle Tomlinson, co-chair of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network Climate Change and Working Group, and I must say I'm elated this morning to serve as your moderator for this event. One Caribbean Sea is the song that resonated in my mind just now. And today we will hear from, a host of different persons working across the Caribbean in our fight for climate action, particularly as it relates to advocacy, awareness, and education. Today's event is a collaborative effort between the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and the FCDO, and it aims to mobilize Caribbean youth in advance of the UNFCCC's COP26 being held in the latter part of this year. Today's event will bring together a host of key players and actors in the Caribbean climate change space to, in fact, promote greater youth involvement and awareness on climate-related issues facing the Caribbean region. We anticipate that the discussions will highlight initiatives, policies, and cross-sectoral collaborations driving the current and hopefully what we hope to see in the future as it relates to response on climate change. With this said, I would like to say thank you all for joining. Thank you, to all the persons who decided to register and who are taking the time out off, their Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, to join us. we ask that you sit back, you be as engaged and as involved as you'd like to be, share your questions, your opinions when the time allows, and just listen in on the different panelists and the different speakers who will be sharing their remarks and their perspectives today. I would also like to use this opportunity to further delve into the session and invite Penelope Stanley, the Deputy Regional Chair of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and the National Coordinator for the Caribbean Youth Environment in St. Kitts and Nevis chapter, to bring opening remarks. Ms. Stanley, over to you at this point.
Good morning. Her Excellency Harriet Cross, British High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago, Amy Smith, MBE, COP26 Caribbean Climate Change Policy Manager, British High Commission, Bridgetown, Barbados, Mr. Reginald Burke, Executive Coordinator of CYEN, Mr. Nixon Barry, Chair of CYEN's Regional Steering Committee, members of the Regional Steering Committee, members of the Technical and Logistic Support from CYEN and Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, members of the panel, advisors, and members of CYEN participants. A very good day to all. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural Caribbean Youth for Climate Action Conference. In a difference. The Caribbean Youth Environment Network, with the support of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom, is pleased to provide this platform for young people of the Caribbean to become climate voices for tomorrow and to save our planet that is warming up at dangerous levels, which is evident through the emergence of more frequent and intense hurricanes and droughts, rising sea levels, hot waves, and a fighting agricultural industry, to name a few. The time has come and we must act now. The Caribbean Youth Environment Network is a truly amazing and dynamic community of over 600 young people from across the wider Caribbean region. Together, we work to ensure that youth have a facility to fully engage in safeguarding the Caribbean's natural resources. For over 25 years, CYEN has been working assiduously to promote the sustainable management of our vital resources in the Caribbean. Today's webinar is designed to give young citizens from across the Caribbean region an opportunity to voice their views. We hope you take full advantage of this. Last but not least, I would like to invite everyone to sign the Caribbean Youth Environment Youth for Climate Action petition at www.stayaliveandstrive.org. On behalf of CYEN and FCDO, I welcome you and thank you for participating. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Penelope. And also, just for highlighting the important work that the CYEN continues to do, both in country, across different chapters, and then as a regional body, continuing to promote climate action, environmental awareness, and, these individual activities across the region. So thank you so much for that welcome. And of course, we look forward to your engagement throughout the event as well. So now that we've had our official opening, and we'd now like to hear remarks from Her Excellency Harriet Cross, who is the British High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago. Harriet has been a member of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service for 23 years. And before coming to Trinidad and Tobago in September of last year, she was the British Consul General to New England. And in her diplomatic career, She has also served at the British Embassy in Morocco and at the UK mission to the UN in New York. So of course, she's one of our distinguished guests that we have who will share with us today. And so I'd like to use this opportunity to hand over to the High Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant introduction by the two of you. And I want to say thank you for inviting me to give a few words of welcome. It's really a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to discuss climate action with a group of people like you. And I really hope that by the end of this session that you are all really even more inspired. I mean, the fact that you are here shows that you have chosen action, which is inspiring to me. But I hope that by the end of this session that you will push even further for more involvement for yourself and for young people in critical climate action at the international, the national and the regional level. Now, author Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called The Tipping Point about societal change, which I would really recommend you read. If you're somebody who is interested in action and making a difference, then this is a really interesting book for you. Now, Malcolm Gladwell says that movements make a difference, and I'm quoting now, when there is a bedrock belief that change is possible and that people can radically transform their behaviour or their beliefs in the face of the right kind of impetus. So partly what we're here to do today is to further generate that right kind of impetus so that we can change people's behaviours and radically transform the world. Now, just kind of a bit of context to us in the Caribbean, I don't need to tell you that small island developing states are experiencing firsthand the effects of climate change. I'm sitting here in Trinidad and Tobago. It took me hours to get home the other night because there was a flash flood brought on by intense rainfall. Coastal erosion is also an issue here. People are telling me they have never seen this before. I'm also reading today reports of damaging oil spills in the Gulf of Paria. This is all really worrying. And across the region, I know we've got people from all across the Caribbean here today. I know you also have seen more regular extreme weather events and warmer temperatures. And I think we're all familiar with the effects of climate change and the impact that it has on fresh water supplies, on agriculture, and on sea level rise. So again, I won't dwell too long on this because I think you're all very, very well up to speed on COP26. But in November this year, the UK, in partnership with Italy, is going to host this climate change conference, COP26. And we've got 4 key goals. The first one is mitigation. So that's about encouraging countries to agree ambitious plans to lowering emissions. It's about adaptation, which is enabling countries to adapt now to the impacts of climate change. And thirdly, it's about finance, because change can't happen without financial backing. And it's about getting the countries who can afford to do it to give finance to those who can't. And finally, it's about cooperation. We've got to do all this collectively. And this is why groups such as CYEN are so important, and why you being here today is very much part of our strategic approach to COP26. So we're about to see the first significant test of the Paris Agreement, namely where countries are expected to reassess their national commitments. And I'm sure you all know these are formally called nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And they're assessing these against the overall temperature goal of that Paris Agreement. Now, the UK firmly believes that we need to limit temperature increase to below 1.5 degrees. And for this to be a success, we also believe that we've got to bring everybody to the table to be part of the decision-making process. So the voice of young people around the world, as we know, has proven already to be a powerful catalyst for change. And we, older people, recognise your call for urgent action. The UK as a government also is committed to involving young people in the planning and hosting of COP26, which is why we're contributing to the session that we're in today. And I want to really commend you for all the great work that you've done so far. There is a lot left to do. Just last week, we saw the release of the IPCC 6th assessment report, which said that the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement was within reach, but to achieve it, higher ambition was needed, and we had to act quickly. So without immediate and drastic action, the impacts of climate change will be severe. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees will require a global transformation of all parts of society. And I pause there because that is a really important point. This is so that we can rapidly reduce emissions. Now, at COP26, the UK is adopting this all of society approach by encouraging real world action from business, from civil society, from cities, and from the science community. And what I want to ask you today is have a think about what constitutes your real world action. So for myself, as well as supporting the work of the UK government ahead of COP26, my personal commitment and contribution to climate action is the decision I made a few years back to go vegan. Now, a recent paper in the journal Science concluded that moving to a vegan diet has the potential to reduce food land use by 76%, greenhouse gas emissions from food by 49%, acidification by 50%, and freshwater withdrawals by 19%. In addition to this, the land freed up from not using it to feed cattle could remove 8.1 billion metric tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year over a period of 100 years if natural vegetation and soil carbon was allowed to return. Now, the author of this piece in Science is somebody called Joseph Poore, Poore. Again, I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at this article. I'll pop my details in the chat if anybody wants me to send it on to them, happy to do so. So Joseph Poore has said that a vegan diet is, and I'm quoting again here, probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, far bigger than cutting down your flights or buying an electric car. So that's the end of the quote, moving on. What I would ask you to do is commit to doing something tangible. So one of my favorite sayings that I remind myself of all the time is that every dollar that you spend is a vote for how you want the world to be. I think, again, something to take away from you today. It's something that helps guide my decisions in the world. And I'll just draw to a close this part of my remarks by reading a tweet that I just saw this morning from an activist called Professor Gary Francione. And I thought it fitted really well into the theme of today's discussion. And again, you might find it inspiring. So he says, and I'm quoting, "It's fine, indeed very healthy, to find the state of affairs crushingly sad and depressing. But if you have the ability to engage in opposition to violence and injustice, you have an obligation to do so." And I think that's really powerful. And again, part of that is the reason why we're here today. So I really look forward to hearing the great lineup. This session, as I've said, forms part of the wider consultative and decision-making process ahead of COP26 and the youth event that will be held on the 28th to the 30th of September in Milan, which is hosted by Italy. And this youth event is going to bring together 400 youth delegates, including from the Caribbean, maybe some of those here today. And that event will submit a final declaration to COP26. So I would encourage you to engage with the representatives of the organisations here today as they share some of their climate work, and more importantly, as they explain how you can get involved. You're also going to hear from our COP26 Caribbean climate change representative, Amy Smith, and she'll talk a bit more about what the UK is doing as incoming COP26 president with youth groups in the next few months in the run up to the summit. And I want to encourage you all to keep up the good work and continue holding governments, the business community and wider society to account. It is so important. Global plans and policies are incredibly important, but they're not enough to achieve climate commitments or to avoid dangerous levels of warming with potentially catastrophic impacts. We need everybody to be involved at a personal and a political level. You have to keep pushing everybody, the people who've got the power and the influence, keep pushing them to do better. So in closing, I want to thank the Caribbean Youth Environment Network for the stellar job that they have done in mobilising Caribbean youth and helping to create this platform to give you all a voice and an opportunity to participate in the global movement to save our planet. Thank you so much. I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, for sharing, that book that you highlighted, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Everyone, please recall that this is something that we are being championed to go out and read. So this is something that, all of us will be able to report on in the future. We have read The Tipping Point and we are well aware, of what we can anticipate when that tipping point is in fact reached. Madame Cross also spoke about SIDS and the effect that climate change has had and will continue to have. She spoke also about collective cooperation as a strategic approach to climate action. And, that is something that is so profound because, oftentimes while we speak about individual action, we also need to recognize that as in Jamaica, we say, when you're alone, you can get so far, but when you are together, you get a lot more work done. So for us to be able to recognize the importance of collective cooperation is something, that we look forward to as we seek to move forward where advocacy and climate action is concerned. So thank you so much for sharing those. You also mentioned the Milan conference that I will be attending as well as a delegate from Jamaica. At this point, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us, for sharing, and, for bringing across these points. I'd also like to, at this point, highlight that a tremor was felt recently, maybe about an hour or maybe 45 minutes ago. I even felt it here in Jamaica. And from the reports coming on Twitter and all other news sources, it seems that Haiti has, in fact, been hit by this earthquake. And so at this point, we want to send our prayers and our thoughts with Haiti and other Caribbean countries that were in fact impacted by the earthquake, which from my understanding measured over 7 on the Richter scale. So at this point, while we're here having this discussion and wanting to build opportunities for collaboration and communication, we also want to keep our Caribbean neighbors in our thoughts as they go through these challenging times. At this point, I would like to ask our technical team to share a COP video that we have here for the audience. So following that, we will delve into our other session. So technical team, COP26 video. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those videos. And you know, something that jumped out at me from one of the presentations was that 11 million people are currently at risk of being pushed into poverty by, you know, the anticipated and continued effects of climate change. And that is something that is so profound. That is something that when you think of the magnitude of what climate change will do, not only to individuals who are already vulnerable and individuals who are already, you know, facing some of the consequences, but the potential impact as well, and the additional persons who will be forced into, you know, uncomfortable living conditions because of, you know, the anticipated impacts. And it just goes to show the importance of action, as we mentioned before, whether it's individual, whether it's collective. At the end of the day, we all have to ensure that we focus on the 3 C's of communicating, collaborating, and, you know, cohering around climate action, particularly when we look at populations that are already vulnerable. And, you know, on that note, I'd like to open the first session, which in fact will focus on presenting the findings of the Caribbean Youth Climate Action 2021 survey. And the 2 presenters that we will have in this segment are actually also 2 CYEN chapter members from Barbados, who are both researcher analysts. So we have with us Carla Nichols and Gerard Thompson Springer, who will bring, you know, a summary of the survey to us, highlighting some of the key findings and what, in essence, the survey represented. So to fellow CYENers, over to you.
Thank you, Janelle, for that warm introduction. Today, Carl and I will be presenting the main findings from the research paper, Caribbean Youth Engagement in Climate Change Towards COP26 by the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Youth engagement in climate change initiatives and policies is imperative for the Caribbean. Therefore, understanding how to engage youth is vital for our sustainable development. The research paper focuses on gaining insight from Caribbean youth about how climate change has affected their lives and communities, and how it may affect their futures. In the paper, youth were considered to be individuals 30 years and younger. The respondents came from 21 Caribbean territories, with the majority coming from Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and Antigua and Barbuda. There was a gender imbalance in those who responded, with female respondents outnumbering males at more than 2 to 1, or at 70% for females compared to 28% for males. 2/3 of the participants in the survey, 67%, were tertiary educated, while 28% reported being educated up to secondary school. Now, the first major theme from the research paper that we will be discussing is climate change awareness among Caribbean youth. In order for young people to contribute to the management and mitigation of climate change, and its effects in the region, they must be first aware of the problem and provided with more information if needed. Therefore, we found it extremely important to first gauge the awareness of the participants. It was found that more than 98% of participants were aware of the term climate change, while 95% believed that climate change was an occurring phenomenon, while 88% believed that it was happening right now. This shows us that climate change was a well-known term among Caribbean youth, and it is generally seen as a relevant issue. However, the research then goes on to investigate how well do Caribbean youth understand climate change. Around 57% of surveyed youth stated that they completely understood climate change, while 20% stated they somewhat understood climate change. When asked what caused climate change, the group was further divided, with the majority, 59%, stating that climate change is a combination of man-made and natural processes, while 38% stated it was caused by human activity only. These results highlighted an interesting point, as it implied that the majority of you felt that human activity was a significant contributing factor to climate change, a sentiment that coincides with the recent International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report, which expressed that human activity has been the main contributing factor to climate change. In fact, the report stated that human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that's unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. Now, Carla will now discuss the outlook of youth on climate change. Over to you, Carla.
After capturing the level of awareness of climate change of Caribbean youth, the study sought to glean their outlook. When asked to evaluate the importance of climate change to the Caribbean, 99% of those who responded thought it was important with 84.4% estimating that it was extremely important, dwarfing the 14.4% that thought it was only somewhat important. When asked to explain the reason for climate change's importance to the region, many respondents contrasted the region's geographical vulnerability with its small role in creating the problem. There was an overwhelming sentiment that the region depended on the so far inadequate actions of others to mitigate the crisis. While Caribbean youth recognized that the latest IPCC report concluded that IPCC report concluded, that is, climate change was caused by human activities, there was an acute awareness that all humans did not have the same carbon footprint or benefit equally from past emissions. Respondents also expressed that the Caribbean was ill-suited to adapt and respond to the crisis because of a lack of resources and historical injustices, which have left economies especially vulnerable to the shocks of natural disasters and ill-equipped to recover and adapt to extreme weather events or coastal flooding. Many answers also highlighted the precarious positions many Caribbean nations find themselves in as it relates to food and water security, where droughts and floods predicted to increase in frequency in the future would only compound this precarity. The recognition of the significance of climate change to the Caribbean was reflected in the polled youth levels of concern. 98.7% of the polled participants expressed concern about climate change, with 64% reporting that their concern was extreme. This level of concern was consistent among males and female respondents, with very few reporting that they were not at all concerned. Respondents were asked if climate change posed a serious threat to people around the world. 87% indicated that they agreed with that assessment, with 79% strongly agreeing. When asked whether it was a serious threat to them and their families, 82% agreed, with 58% strongly agreeing. These sentiments can be explained by the urgency with which the polled youth see the climate crisis. As Jared mentioned, 88% of respondents agreed with the statement, "Climate change is happening now," indicating that they did not view it as a problem for future generations, but for themselves. The polled youth saw climate change as a present and immediate threat that would affect them personally. 58.4% of polled youth thought that climate change was already affecting them personally, while a much larger contingent, 86.4%, said that it would affect them personally in the future. This suggests that even if the youth did not perceive climate change to be already affecting them, they believed that one day it would. Participants were asked to expound on how climate change was affecting them presently, and some expressed that the hotter temperatures were already affecting their ability to work outside at length and were detrimental to their health. Some described the rise in temperatures as unbearable. The word unbearable was used 11 times in the study to describe the temperatures, and reported that it affected their ability to concentrate. Health concerns were also extended into the mental health toll of the climate crisis, with respondents reporting that the continual degradation of the environment took a heavy psychological toll, especially the knowledge that their livelihoods and quality of life could be wiped out suddenly by an extreme weather event, which they had little control over and could not adequately prepare for. Participants also expressed that changing weather patterns were already affecting their ability to grow food and have a stable water supply. Seaweed, exacerbated by warmer water and changes in the nutrient levels of the ocean, were affecting tourism and therefore people's livelihoods. As for how the climate crisis was perceived to affect the respondents in the future, respondents expressed concern about the environment that they will be handing off to their children and grandchildren. Many expressed concerns about the economic impact of the climate crisis and thought that their ability to have a dignified living would be affected by changes in crop yields, devastation by hurricanes, and changes in tourism consumption patterns. Persons were also concerned about the rising food costs as a result of crop failures overseas, where most food was imported from, as well as at home. There was a realization that many Caribbean countries were dependent on the tourism sector, which as the driver of emissions would need to be curtailed to improve climate outcomes. Tourism also heightened economic precarity due to it being sensitive to shocks like natural disasters, beach erosion, and sea level rise. Many also reported that for these reasons, climate change was affecting their decision to start a family. Participants were also asked to rank their top climate concerns. Extreme weather conditions, water shortages, air pollution, extinction of plants and animals, and impact on agricultural production and food were the top 5 concerns. These were followed by concerns about sea level rise, health concerns, heat stress, and economic concerns. This highlights a discrepancy in the way climate change is often reported in the international media, where sea level rise is given a priority. This conflicts with the priorities of Caribbean youth. This is perhaps because sea level rise has been gradual, while phenomena like hurricanes are sudden and immediate. The overall outlook of the polled youth and the climate crisis was quite pessimistic, with only 9% signaling that they believe that the world would act in time to halt the worst effects of abrupt climate change. 47% thought the world would not act in time, while 42% did not know enough to make a prediction. Men were slightly more pessimistic than women in the survey. When asked whether their countries and the Caribbean were doing enough to tackle climate change, a majority of respondents disagreed. Only 14% thought that the Caribbean was doing enough, while 12% thought that their country was doing enough. Next, Jared will talk about climate change communication.
In order to better engage the region's youth in climate change initiatives and actions, we need to have a solid understanding of how Caribbean youth communicate and gain information about climate change. Therefore, the study investigates climate change communication among the region's youth. Participants were asked how often they talk to family and friends about climate change. Roughly 65% respondents stated sometimes, while 25% stated frequently, and 10% stated that they never discuss climate change with their friends and family. This shows that even though climate change isn't necessarily the most talked about topic among young people, it resides in their discussions. However, it was found that for those who reported being extremely concerned about climate change, they were 14 times more likely to discuss climate change frequently with their network than average. This indicated that while most of the polled Caribbean youth discuss climate change to some degree with their friends and family, concern about climate change is a major determining factor in having respondents be more proactive in these discussions. As it relates to the sources of climate change information and the media, it was found that surveyed youth learn and communicate about climate change more frequently on social media platforms, followed by educational institutions and television and radio. It was also found that participants trusted information from schools and other educational institutions above all others. This implies that Caribbean youth are more likely to trust and utilize the information about climate change provided from educational institutions. The least trusted sources of climate change information among Caribbean youth were determined to be electric companies and churches. Furthermore, the slide needs to switch again. Furthermore, 90% of participants stated they thought more information was needed to provide to improve the public's understanding of climate change, while only 0.8% stated no and 2.5% stated or remained unsure. Respondents were asked also how they felt information. The respondents were asked about how they felt information was shared about climate change on both local and international level. Specifically, respondents were asked to state their level of agreement that climate change and its problems are underreported in international news, to which 36% and 28% of respondents completely and somewhat agreed respectively. This shows that over 50% were unsatisfied with the coverage of climate change problems on an international level. When the same question was asked for local news, 49% and 27% of respondents stated they completely and somewhat agreed respectively. These results showed that just like international news, a large majority of Caribbean youth felt that local news underreported climate change issues. However, it also highlighted that Caribbean youth had more confidence in international news coverage of climate change than other local news outlets. Now, Carla will now discuss youth engagement with institutions.
As it relates to Caribbean youth and institutions, results suggest that there is room for improvement as far as outreach goes, as there is often low name recognition and lower knowledge of the processes to engage with these institutions concerning climate change. The participants were asked who they believe should be leading the efforts in tackling climate change. The polled youth believed that national governments should be the most responsible for leading the fight against climate change, followed by international organizations, and then business and industry. Local civil society organizations and individuals were seen as the least equipped to lead in climate matters. These results suggest that there is a belief that it takes action by large institutions rather than individuals or businesses alone in order to combat climate change. There was low name recognition of many of the large international institutions and frameworks dealing with climate change. 39% of those polled were familiar with the United Nations framework on climate change, and 28% were familiar with the Conference of Youth. There was more familiarity with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, with 55% of respondents reporting that they were aware of them. Male respondents were more familiar than female respondents by a small margin. 61% of participants did not believe that youth were adequately consulted by national leaders and organizations. Participants were asked if they knew how to engage with their national governments, CARICOM, OECS organizations, the Commonwealth, and the United Nations. In all cases, fewer than half of respondents indicated that they knew how to engage with these institutions. National governments and the UN were the institutions participants knew most how to interact with. These results suggest that Caribbean youth have a strong faith in the ability of institutions to tackle climate change, more than businesses or individuals, but want and need more information and outreach to become involved with these institutions. Next, Jared will discuss youth participation.
The research also focused on youth's current participation in the mitigation of climate change and its effects. Participants were asked whether young people such as themselves could make a difference through climate action. A large majority, 88%, indicated that they believed they could, while 2% said no, and 9% stated they were unsure, while 1% stated they did not care. However, when asked if youth in their respective countries participated in climate change activities and discussions, often 52% stated no, while 24% stated yes, while the remaining 24% remained unsure. This shows that even though the majority of the polled youth believed their actions and the actions of other young people could make a difference, they also felt more needed to be done by the youth in their home countries. Furthermore, of the polled participants, 81% stated they actively engaged in climate action. When they were polled for some of the climate actions they undertook personally, 76.1% of youth stated they reduced their waste through consistent use of reusable water bottles, and 73.4% reduced their use of plastics in general. 56.7% of respondents reduced their water usage, 52.8% ate locally, 52.1% reduced energy usage, 47.2% participated in tree planting initiatives, 45.2% carpooled or used public transportation, and 39.2% and 28% reduced household waste and did at-home composting respectively. Only 1.6 other respondents said they participated in none of these activities. This inferred that most of the polled Caribbean youth both believe young people can make a difference in climate change and actively work to reduce the impacts of their daily lives. It was found that females were more likely to respond than that they had integrated climate change mitigation actions into their lives at 83.5% versus 76.5% for males. Youth were also asked if they were aware of any organizations that were involved in climate activities. Over half of the respondents replied in the affirmative, 52%. When asked what those organizations were, the most common answers were CARICOM Climate Change, CARICOM Climate Change Center, United Nations Environment Program, the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, and the World Wildlife Fund. The respondents were also asked if they were aware of any of the youth organizations involved in climate change activities, and a majority, 56.6%, answered no, the remainder answering yes. When asked to name those organizations, of the 177 respondents, the most popular answers were CYEN, 4-H, Fridays for Future, Key Club, and UNICEF. These findings suggest that youth are more aware of general clubs catering to climate change than ones targeted specifically at youth. Polled youth were also were also asked to suggest one thing that could be done to improve how young people are involved in the mitigation of climate change, our management of climate change. A popular sentiment was that more awareness needed to be raised on climate change. Suggestions for how this could be achieved were through early childhood education and programs, making it a requirement to learn about in schools, having additional school projects on climate change, and making learning about climate change more fun and engaging. Another frequent response was that Caribbean youth need to be given more opportunities to engage in climate change and environmental sector. The poll view suggested that the creation of jobs in the climate change sector would improve interest shown by young people, as well as the provision of travel and leadership opportunities. Additionally, participants suggested that another way to improve how young people are involved in the management of climate change was to truly give them a voice and further enfranchise them. The respondents answered that the youth should be allowed to present solutions to policymakers and have programs for young people to turn their ideas into implementable plans. This ends our presentation on the major results of the Caribbean Youth Engagement in Climate Change towards COP26 research paper. Please feel free to provide feedback and or questions. Thank you.
Thank you as well so much, both of you, for putting together this presentation. From the first look of it, from the snapshot that you've been able to present, you recognize that this has been a very comprehensive survey, and being able to capture all the different perceptions and views of young people as it relates to what they consider to be the major causes of climate change, the role that they have to play, the role that international and local media have been playing, and in particular, the different organizations, that have been affecting change on the ground. So I think this is going to be a useful document to be able to, bring forth the views of a lot of the young people and will further feed into the youth statement that we hope to collaborate, put all the information together for sharing. So thank you so much to both of you. And, before I delve into the question and answer segment for this particular session and hearing, from some of our guests, I'd just like to share some of the key takeaways that I think, resonated with me from this. The one that was shared that said the Caribbean is ill-suited to adapt due to limited resources and past injustices is something that I think a lot of persons are also of the view. They don't necessarily think that given the resources and the constraints that we encounter, we are able to adapt. And so there has been some reluctance and hesitance on the part of some. The idea of the pessimism that you mentioned, that only 9% of young people think that, we are at the stage of doing enough or being able to advance action that is necessary is also something that I think is quite important. And then the idea that there's room for improvement, I think that is one of the most important things that have come over from the particular survey. So for me, I think those were very kind of profound findings coming out of it. And, at this point, I'd just like to again say thank you so much to the CYEN for putting this survey together and being able to capture, some of these key thoughts and opinions of the young people. And thanks again to both of you for sharing. We really appreciate, and we look forward to being able to, further delve into these findings as, time progresses. At this point, we will solicit feedback on the survey from 3 panelists in this segment. First, we have Mrs. Lisa Bailey, who is an international consultant with the Pan American Health Organization, and she's currently the Communications and Visibility Coordinator for the 5-year EU-funded Climate Change and Health Action Project for 16 CARIFORUM countries. I must say thank you so much, Lisa, for deciding to join. I currently work alongside Lisa as a volunteer in this particular project, and she's excellent at what she does. So I'm happy that she's here to be able to share with us this morning. Along with Lisa, we also have Ama Kisiwa Boteng, who is a research officer for the UNFCCC's Regional Collaboration Center in St. George's. Thank you so much as well for joining, and we look forward to hearing your contributions in this segment. And of course, our final panelist in this segment is Mr. Kevin Manning, who is a project consultant in the Office of the Global Partnerships and Sustainable Futures with the UWI. So all 3 individuals know that they've been introduced. I'd like to, at this point, open up the floor for them to share their feedback and perspectives and to give us, a snapshot of what their initial thoughts are. So first we will have Lisa, then we will have Aman, then followed by Kevin. So thank you so much. And Lisa, over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. The results are very interesting. I'm going to say out front that we need to work together because we also did a survey earlier this year, and the results are very similar. The difference is that our population, we were upset because we didn't get a lot of young people, and we were going to try to do a similar survey with young people. But why should I do it if you have done it and you're working in this area? And I'm all about collaboration. So you see all of the logos behind my head because this project that I'm a part of, it incorporates 6 main partners, well, 5 partners, including the Pan American Health Organization, and we're really happy to be a part of this. 64% of the respondents in our survey were between 25 and 54. We did not get a lot of people under 25. So your data is very important to us, and I think we need to talk further on this. The results were very interesting. They're very similar to what we found. People are aware of climate change in the Caribbean, and they want more done. They want more education. They want to be more involved, and I think they want more meaningful participation when we're talking about young people now. Young people want meaningful participation, and they want to collaborate more. So I think we need to find ways to work together more and to make sure that this issue is highlighted with the immediacy which they are seeing. They are not seeing this as a problem that we need to deal with for generations to come. We're here now, we're seeing the effects, we're feeling it. And I think we just need to come together and make this a priority for sure. There's so many things that jumped out of me that I don't want to go on and on, but I'd rather us just discuss. But certainly the need for more education, the need for multiple platforms and trusted sources. This is something that we talk about a lot at PAHO, where we always jump to social media. So yes, we're on social media, but do we trust social media to give us the correct information? So that's why I think policy and getting this topic onto the syllabus of young people, primary school and secondary school, it's so critical, but we'll only get there with advocacy. So those will be my starting words, but I have a lot more to say on this, but I'll pass to the next person.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. And just before we pass over to the other panelists, I just like to share that something that you just said that I think is particularly important and something that we continue to recognize in the space is that this idea of duplication of efforts is something that we need to reduce. As you rightly said, you did a survey, but your target population, or rather the respondents, weren't as many young people as you had wanted. And so instead of going back out and, disseminating another instrument, you rely on, an entity that has already collated this sort of data, and then you seek to see how you can partner with them to be able to utilize that information to everybody's benefit so that it provides a win-win situation. So thank you so much for highlighting your experience, and I do think it's something that as we go forward we should try to reduce resource use, particularly where the information that we need is already in existence. So thank you so much for sharing. We know that there's a lot of amazing work that's being done currently through the PAHO CARI Forum project, and we look forward to future work that will come out of that as well. So thank you so much. And now I will pass over to Amma for her remarks.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us this afternoon from where I sit. Okay, so from the results of the survey, it's very interesting, and it comes at a point in time where the UNFCCC, for instance, is working more with youth, and then we are engaging the youth in many of our projects and programs that we are undertaking. One aspect that is very interesting to know is the aspect of capacity building. I think that capacity building is a very key area in that it enlightens everybody, and it enlightens even the younger person to even grasp what climate change is about. And for you to take any action, you need to be highly empowered and know what action you are taking and what it entails And then what are the implications of the action? So capacity building is one key area that needs to be strengthened amongst the youth. And it is not only on social media. These days, there are a number of places that you can do this. You can be writing climate action blogs. It can be in the form of a newsletter, and in education in so many ways where the youth can build their capacities in the area of climate change. And then also not only that, but I think one other area that is very key is the area of collaboration. So the youth alone cannot only work on climate change. You need to build collaboration with government agencies, the private sector, CSOs, NGOs. All these agencies have to come together in order to build them. Capacity building, as I said earlier. And then also one key aspect that could also help with youth engagement as far as climate change is concerned is knowledge sharing platform. So apart from that, there are a number of platforms where youth can come together and then also learn from each other and then collectively share what they have learned from various trainings. So some of these are new developing areas where the youth can capitalize on. And then another aspect is the area of green business. So there was one findings which was talking about increasing employment in the area of green business or climate change. So the youth can also engage in green business incubator programs where they can identify and then encourage creative business opportunities among themselves, which is also going to enhance climate change mitigation and adaptation in the Caribbean. So there are a number of areas, and I think that this research is also very interesting, and I'll be happy to share it with my other colleagues in the UNFCCC for them to know some of the major developments that have come out of a research like this. Thank you, and then happy to answer to any questions that come up.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And, similarly to Lisa, you highlighted the importance of collaboration. And, something that you said that, while youth can be as empowered as they'd like to be and, ready to take on action, we can't do it alone. And so the importance of these other actors and agencies will be critical in ensuring that the kind of reach that we want is achieved. I also like the idea that you shared about green business incubation. Oftentimes we hear about young people not being able to, receive jobs, or, a lot of them not being as interested in certain areas, particularly such as agriculture. And so when we think about incubation, we think about it as a space of mentorship, a hub for the creation of those opportunities. And so I do think that green business incubation is actually something that needs to be more positively explored. And of course, thank you so much for also reiterating the fact that youth are important constituents for the UNFCCC, and that as you continue to work with us, we will continue, to be engaged and feel a part of the process. So thank you so much as well for sharing your contributions on that particular topic. And now we will go over to Mr. Manning for the final comment in this segment. Over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And good evening and good night, wherever you are, maybe in the world. I was taking so many notes that my pen ran out of ink. So I want to ask this question while it's to the top of my head, in relation to, that within the report, it was noted that many respondents trust international news more than their local regional news. So I want to ask this question in relation to the 6th assessment report from the IPCC, which was released. How do you think, and I'm not giving you any additional work, but how do you think respondents now would feel about climate change, having heard that report released, and maybe take a look at that and see how a post-analysis survey in relation to that may result? So I just want to ask that question while it was to the top of my head. We can respond to that later. But this report is extremely necessary and timely, especially in a region which experienced significant data deficit. We lack data in this region to do reports, and I am happy that CYEN has done this, because it was definitely, as Ms. Boateng from UNFCCC noted, we could also go back into our organizations and share that information, and then formulate our programmatic action going forward. This report, I think I would join with Lisa in having more of an understanding with the discussion going forward. So I won't expand and expound too much on the report right now. But I think significant things came out of it, especially in relation to education. I remember from my end at the UWI, we did an education initiative called Solve Climate 2030. And that was an international initiative which we were looking to get more or less climate integrated into education, whether it's engineering, law, well, naturally environment, if you wanted to do medicine and public health coming from that background, and how climate and climate change and health could also be a initiative going forward. So we need to more or less take an understanding and analysis of to how best we can do this going forward, take the education and mix it with climate change education and go from there. So I think that's what I will say for now, and then we will go forward into the discussion after that.
Well, thank you for highlighting, the importance of education, because we recognize how easy it is for misinformation to be something that is absorbed, something that is taken up, and with the advent of social media being something that is so popular now, it's very easy for misinformation to be spread. Just looking now at COVID and some of the things that we see coming out, of different platforms and different spaces, it just goes to show that proper education is going to be critical if we are going to solicit the kind of support and feedback that we need. When we also look at the type of messages, how they are broadcasted, who are our target audience, how do we curate messages to be able to, appeal to these individuals? Those are all going to be important considerations. And so I'm really happy that you brought up the idea of education, because moving forward, it is something that, I think greater attention needs to be paid to, irrespective of whatever the message is. So thank you so much, Kevin. And I hope that we will get to, delve into additional things as we come to the question and answer segment. At this point, however, before we get there, we have an additional guest that we would like to have bring remarks as well. And I would like to use this opportunity to introduce Miss Amy Smith, MBE, who will speak on the support of youth engagement for the UNFCCC COP26. So we've heard about the UNFCCC, we've heard about COP, we've heard about youth, but now we also want to be able to, understand the role that the FCDO will be playing, particularly as it relates to youth engagement. And so Ms. Smith, who currently serves as the COP26 Caribbean Climate Change Policy Manager for the British High Commission in Bridgetown, has in fact held numerous positions in London, working on UN and conflict issues. She joined the FCDO in 2006 following an initial career in the private sector. And, this morning, still morning, again, afternoon for some of us, night possibly for others, she will be sharing with us just the role that the FCDO has played and will continue to play, particularly where youth engagement is concerned. So we will hear from her at this point. Ms. Amy Smith, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I think Elijah is kindly going to share the presentation we have, which we'll keep short rather than have death by PowerPoint. But it's great to join you. We're really delighted to be supporting the work of CYEN, such an important organisation. I'm really admire the work that you're doing. So it's great to be here. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about COP26 and youth engagement. One of the things that struck me from the survey results was the highlighted need to give a voice to youth, and for that to also have the opportunity to engage with policymakers, because I think that's the key point, is making sure that the views of youth and your ideas and your great work really make it through to the decision makers, essentially. So if I could have the next slide, please, Elijah. So the UK, as incoming COP president, really wanted to make COP26 as inclusive as possible. And we really recognise that the voice of youth can really be a strong catalyst, because you will be inheriting this, and we wanted to make sure that you were front and centre in some of the work. So one of the first things that we did was we established the COP26 Civil Society and Youth Advisory Council, which has 5 youth representatives who are from various countries around the world. And they've been involved in the planning process for COP itself, which will be held in the first 2 weeks of November. And they've had the opportunity to feed into policymakers. So having youth represented in some of the planning has been really important to us. 2 of the key moments which are coming up, which some of you have already mentioned, is the Youth for Climate meeting, which will be hosted in Milan by the Italian government. And I'll come into that in a bit more detail, but we've been working with the Italian government on that as it is one of the kind of key pre-COP moments. Also, you've mentioned the Youngo Conference of Youth, so COY16. The UK presidency, we're endorsing that. Youngo is actually organised by volunteers, but we've been trying to work with them to make sure that kind of the outcomes from that are front and centre in COP26. And then we have regular meetings with the UNFCCC focal points, which include youth and environment NGOs. And, you know, our UN colleagues might be able to speak to that in more detail. Most importantly for the Caribbean is our diplomatic network. You know, we really want to listen to voices in individual countries. So I'm based in Barbados, but I work across the whole of the region. So trying to speak to youth groups and civil society from all Caribbean countries. You know, CYEN is incredibly important and has done brilliant work, as I say. But we also have the CARICOM youth ambassadors. I think some are speaking later. The Commonwealth is also a really important structure, and it was great to see that the kind of confidence in some of these international organisations is fairly high, because those are some of the routes to more formal engagement. I also just wanted to say the COP President Designate, Alok Sharma, you know, he really wants to listen to voices when he visits, and he was really disappointed that we didn't manage to get a meeting with you when he was in the Caribbean last month. So certainly the discussion we have today will be sending to his office, because, you know, he is really engaged in this, and we send our apologies that it wasn't possible to meet that time. Yeah, so I could have the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of process, the Milan conference is really important. So there, you know, 2 representatives from every single UN member state, so that's every country in the Caribbean, will be funded to go to Milan and talk about COP26 and come up with a clear statement of what you want to see. And that statement will then be discussed with ministers. So it's, you know, the opportunity to prepare the ground for COP26 and really have access to decision makers. And that's why engaging with your 2 representatives will be really important. And then we have the Conference of Youth, which is just before COP itself. And that really is where the CYEN statement that you're working on will be really important. So you can feed in that statement, which, you know, will be influenced by the survey you've just done and by discussions you're having. And that, again, will be fed into the wider discussion and will be fed into policymakers at COP itself. And because the UK recognises that actually representation matters, you know, being in the room, we also have a dedicated day on the 5th of November, so in the middle of COP itself, will be the Youth Day. And that will be an opportunity for younger people who are at COP, whether virtually or in person, to, shall I say, interrogate the decision makers and kind of really give them the thoughts that you have, and kind of making sure that you are coming forward with action. And I think that will be for COP, you know, a really important day. I also wanted to flag kind of whilst COP26 is an important moment, you know, really critical that we're seeing the action coming forward, you know, and as our High Commissioner mentioned, we're looking for NDCs from every single country in the world. So if your country has not submitted one by COP, that's something you might want to think about lobbying them on. But it's not the end of the story. The IPCC report was clear that this is the long term. So one of the things we recommend is start thinking about COP27, which we host. It's Africa's turn to host, not be in Egypt. Start thinking about your participation, how you get organised, and make sure the voice from the whole of the Caribbean is heard as well, so that you're actually part of this process and kind of building it year on year. And I think the plans that CYEN have are really important, and just engage with your policymakers in country, and start kind of bringing together your voice. being organised really helps. There's also a lot of policy support out there. So, you know, speaking to international organisations about how they can help. So start thinking about that. And then I will pause there, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Before I go to the questions, I'd just like to say I appreciate the fact that you mentioned the importance of giving a voice to the youth. And, you know, both the COI and the Youth for Climate event are two events that I hopefully will be actively engaged in, given that I was selected for both. But I'm also happy for the fact that these events are being done and that, you know, all youth across all countries are being given the opportunity to participate. So I'm really happy, you know, for the sort of engagement that's very inclusive. And, you know, inclusion is also something that you reiterated. So really happy for the efforts that are being, you know, put forward. And I'm also particularly grateful for the support of the FCDO in CYEN's efforts. Thank you so much. And we also look forward to future opportunities that will arise as a result. So thank you so much for that. I recognize that two participants have in fact raised their hands. We have David and Chantal. So David, please, if you are able to unmute your mic, you may go ahead and ask your question, and then we will have Chantal afterwards.
Okay. Go on in there. My question is, what is the Caribbean? What is the climate? What kind of system you're dealing with climate change for origin in Peter? What's the hydrocarbons have been phased out? When's the possible phase out? When's the possible phase out? What the next step for the climate change? Once the depleted substances have been phased out, next step.
Okay, so thank you so much for the question. I think that the question that is being asked is what is the next step, or what are the next steps for climate action in the Caribbean, particularly as it relates to the phasing out of hydrocarbons, right? So what is the possibility of having hydrocarbons phased out? And, you know, what are the next steps? Or in your opinion, what should be some of the next steps? So I don't know if any panelists in particular would like to address that question.
I mean, I'm not a climate change specialist, I'm a communication specialist, but I can say that, I thank you for the question. I think two things. So we are a little ways off from that, but certainly in the Caribbean, from what I've been reading and from listening to people, I believe that we don't contribute a lot to that, but we feel a lot of the effects. I do see a lot of Caribbean countries trying to make a difference in terms of more electrical vehicles. I was in a discussion recently where I know in Barbados it's happening, where governments are making the steps towards making sure some of the public vehicles are now electric as well. We're seeing more of that. They're actually reducing some of the taxes so that more people can bring them in at a reduced cost. But I mean, I think we have a long way to go as it relates to that. So this is a multi-pronged effort that we have to make here. So that's just one part of the problem, but I think we are making steps towards it, but I think we need to move faster, obviously, to accelerate it making a real difference, not only in the Caribbean, but across the world. But that's I'm not a climate expert answer to that one.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thank you as well, David, for sharing such an important question. Kevin, I see that you're unmuted. Would you like to go as well?
Yeah, sure. I was a bit confused just now in relation to the format, but I think I have exactly what the question is asking now. It's understood. And I agree with Lisa. I'm also not a climate expert, but we are ways off from that point. But there are other huge situations we have to deal with first. We have debt, we have rising sea levels, we have rising temperatures, we have all these various other issues that we have to more or less place into policy, we have to regulate, and we have to more or less address before we can get to that stage. I mean, that is the long-term look as to what is going to come next. And yeah, maybe there will be a time when we can say, you know what, this is the result. but let's deal with what we can right now, and then we can more or less address as we go forward. So that's my thoughts on that matter.
Thank you so much. Ms. Smith, would you like to go? You're unmuted as well.
Thank you. So just to say, every country is different, right? And everyone has different energy needs and different situations. So that's why we've really encouraged every country to come forward with an NDC, which sets out what they're planning to do to reduce emissions and what they're planning to do, in some cases on adaptations, kind of how you're going to adapt the changes. So I'd recommend that you look at those. There's a UN registry of every single one. You'll be able to see what your government is planning to do. And we've reached the point where the Paris Summit kind of set out the ideals for this and kind of keeping 1.5. Glasgow is about making it happen. And that's why we pushed quite hard on the NDC to be like, how are you actually going to bring it in? So it's definitely worth having a look at your country's NDC.
Thank you again. Thank you as well for sharing those perspectives and the importance of the NDCs in ensuring that the kind of objectives that are agreed to are in line with the country's experiences. So thank you so much for that as well. We also have Chantal, who would like to pose a question. So Chantal, please go ahead. And I recognize that Rhea also had her hand up. Not sure she'd still like to pose a question, but Chantal, please go ahead. Ms. Booth, are you able to unmute? Okay, is it possible then for you to type the question? Is it possible for you to type the question and I could ask it on your behalf? Okay, Leah, do you have a question? Chantal, we will try to resolve. Okay, Rhea, do you have a question as well? Because I'm not sure if either of them are able to post. So Chantal's question, Chantal's question was as it relates to her being a sustainable energy specialist and a human rights advocate. And she wanted to know if any of the panelists were able to point her to any scholarships that were providing opportunities for youth to attend COP. So that was Ms. Amina's question. So I recognize that Ms. Cross has responded, but I'm not sure if any of the panelists are aware of any opportunities that are being afforded for youth to attend COP.
The most I can say at this stage is that check your local government, and that's where most of the scholarships will be found, especially in areas that focus primarily on climate change and the environment. If not, you can always try to seek sponsorship, but mainly the governments will be the best as you need that authentication and verification to go through.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Kevin. Rhea, sorry about earlier. Are you now able to pose your question?
No, I wanted to make a comment on the first question as it relates to what would be done about climate change. And I believe that our governments are not doing enough. I disagree that we do not contribute as much as the rest of the world. We do not contribute as much, but per capita, we do contribute quite a lot. I'm a Trinidadian, and last year, I believe we were in the top 100, and this should not be. We import too much and we do not reuse our plastics, and there's no infrastructure, I believe, that allows for us to do this. Yeah, this was my contribution because I think the first step would be to build infrastructure and educate the entire population on how to use this infrastructure and sort of have some sort of sanctions or some reward in order to promote the use of these new structures that would protect us against climate change, that would make sure that we don't produce more than we can actually handle. We have a part to play as
Caribbean people, and this must be taken into consideration. Not because we're small means we have no impact.
Those are some very profound points. So thank you so much for sharing that. I see where Miss Bailey would like to go. Lisa, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I mean, it's how do we message without saying, you know, it's not our fault, so we don't have to be interested. So I agree. And that's not something that I think we should promote in our messaging. You know, we are the victims here. We have a role to play as well. So I didn't mean, I mean, yes, we do contribute less. Trinidad is a different situation because they're, you know, producers of oil and all of that. But I agree. And it's not a message that you would see me pushing. I think we all have a role to play. So it's important that you raise that. I see Ms. Cross also answered one of the questions as it relates to males, and not as many males responding. Same in our survey. Ms. Cross gave a really good answer as well. In terms of women sometimes seeing more as nurturing. I'm more interested in that. Perhaps that is part of it. But I think we also need to meet men where they are. Interested to hear Kevin's thoughts on this as well, because it's something that troubles me. We see it in every survey, not just related to climate change. Yes, we see this with health as well. I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but I have to find a way to deal with it, because we can't just, and it happens in all surveys. So selection bias, right? So how do we know that even in our survey, the people who answered aren't people who already are interested in this area? Our survey was done through Digicel and Trend Media, so it went to your cell phones. So it's possible that only people who are interested already in environment or health answered my survey, and it may have happened for you as well. So those are just two things I wanted to mention.
Yeah. I'm seeing a question here in the chat that speaks to the Green Climate Fund, and it says that in 2014, the GCF was about 10.3 billion US dollars. What is the current figure, and in what areas and territories is it being spent? I'm not sure if anyone here is able to address on this particular question. I guess it may be something that will require maybe some amount of follow-up on. Thanks for the question nonetheless. So we had, in fact, during registration, posed an opportunity for, you know, some of the registrants to share questions that they would like to be answered. And so I have one question in particular that I will pose to all panelists, and then we will have their feedback before we go to the short break. So the first question that I would like to ask is, what are the different programs in place, again, from each of your organizations, that are in place to assess youth, particularly where climate action or climate advocacy is concerned? So you can just give briefly a summary of the different programs that are in place to assist youth that are interested in climate change advocacy. I'm not sure who would like to go first.
I'll go first. And I would do that because I have no ink, and also to the fact that we suppose the question in which I would also like to answer. I think in the situation when you see the disparities between the genders, it's something that we notice at the university level as well when it comes to academia. And I have asked it before, but no males seem to really know the answer. It's either just a nonchalant, I don't know, or, you know, we'll see about that, and, you know, it just goes that particular way. So it's something that must be addressed, especially when we come to, I don't want to say a existential crisis for some, such as climate change, but it's more or less when you look at policy, legislation, when you look at leadership, how you see the disparities that are now changing one way or the other, and not necessarily towards one of equity, but towards availability. So it's something we need to look at. And then you Janelle, you would have asked, inquired about the different programs. Well, the UWI has been in climate change and climate change research since establishment. That is over 70 plus years of research now. And at various points, we've had many initiatives, many understandings as to how best we can look at the initiatives in terms of advocacy. We have UEStat, which is the student today, alumni tomorrow. We have the Students Guild, and they are all responsible for their own various initiatives. We have members from the UWI who are members of CYEN. We have the various island associations. They do climate change work as well. And we also have a youth development program which focuses towards climate change, at least among many other programmatic areas. But more so, I should say, the university at this stage has more or less pivoted towards climate change and climate change work. You can see our researchers from the MONA and the Global, let me try to get the name properly. The MONA Research Group, which is led by Professor Michael Taylor, who's also worked on the UNFCCC policies, who would have also worked on the 6th assessment report. He works alongside his students, and Dr. David Smith, who works alongside students as well. They do programs. They're always looking for youth to come on and assist where possible. We have Professor John Agard in Trinidad, who's done amazing work down there as well. Always ready to work with the youth. So you just look at it, and the opportunities for advocacy is there. We partner where possible. We do our initiatives. At this point, I'm on the same panel with Janelle, Lisa, and Ms. Boateng for the PAHO climate change and health initiatives. So we do that work. It's not always public, but we work a lot behind the scenes to get in a lot done at this stage. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. Yeah, I get to work with a lot of people on this panel. I've met Amma before as well in some meeting at some point. Can't remember. I think it was HNAP or co-benefit, something that we were doing. So yes, PAHO is working, as you see, the different partners. We work through our partners. I work closely with the CARICOM youth ambassadors, and they are focusing in specifically on climate change and health for their 2 years. So that's very important. We also have our PAHO Youth for Health ambassadors. A lot of them are interested in working in climate and health, and they will be doing projects as well. Through this EU CARIFORM project, we also have a youth engagement plan. I'm not as young as I used to be, so I rely on my young people. And I've actually met with CYEN before, and we plan to work together as partners. So there's a lot of collaboration happening. UNICEF is not a major partner, but as in written in, but they have become a very important partner for us, and we are working with UNICEF as well and their ambassadors. So it's coming together, and there's a lot more. Like Kevin said, everything is not public, but I do think as it relates, I keep going back to this survey and our survey. I do think if we put these together, we can move forward. So that would be my answer to that. But there's a lot more that's happening. And I think perhaps we need one space where people can, because there are questions coming in here from so many different angles. And I keep hearing that from young people. Where can I go to find information? I know some people say you need to look around, you need to do your research. But if we want this to be important to them, you need to make it as easy as possible for them to have the information, financing, scholarships, statistics for this region. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Lisa. The importance of somewhat of a hub that is, updated regularly, so persons can go to say, okay, let's see what the opportunities are, what the funding opportunities are for this particular month. So thank you again for sharing that. Amma, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So like my other colleagues rightly said, many of the projects or the programs we have for youth are done in collaboration with UNICEF and many of the regional organizations. So for UNFCCC, we have the Youth Climate Dialogues. So we have this annual event where the youth from all the countries that we work with come together to have a dialogue on how to manage climate change issues in their region. So this is done in collaboration with the 8 focal points we have in all the countries that we work with. And then also we have the Academy for Global Youth Leadership Empowerment, also known as the Agile Initiative. So under this initiative, it aims to develop and build capacity of existing youth from various stakeholder groups in the region in order to train them on negotiations, the climate negotiations. So for this initiative, it is about starting, and we are going to have a series of webinars for the youth in the region. And then also we have an upcoming project also on training of trainees. So this youth that I'm talking about are going to train the little children in the schools on Paris Agreement and the implications in the region. So it's about starting, and I would encourage each and everyone here on the CYEN to also come on board, and then together we can help build climate change in the region. And then one last thing that I want to also talk about is the visits of the high-level climate champion to the Caribbean. So we are going to have the climate champion from UK, Nigel Toppin, visit Grenada and Barbados, and we have already recommended the CYEN to his team, and he's interested to know many of the activities that the CYEN is doing. So in this regard, it will also be a great opportunity for you to also showcase some of the activities as a youth you've been doing in the area of climate change adaptation and mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you. So first off, let me say thank you to all of our presenters, Ms. Bailey, Ms. Boateng, Mr. Manning, and of course to Ms. Smith, for sharing, and as well to Gerard and our other colleague, Carla, for highlighting the survey results and bringing to our attention the views and perspectives of Caribbean youth, as well as the perspectives also shared by the panelists as to their overall perceptions of what the results mean locally as well as regionally. So thank you to all for being able to contribute to this particular session. We have an interlude which will speak to the Stay Alive and Thrive ambassadors in the region. So we will have a short break between our next session coming up, and you'll hear a little bit more about the Stay Alive and Thrive ambassadors. So thank you all so much. And before we transition to the second session, please watch this video to provide some perspectives to one of the ongoing campaigns of the CYEN, which is the Stay Alive and Thrive campaign. Okay, thank you for sharing. So the Stay Alive and Thrive campaign is another initiative, another endeavor of CYEN, and what we were able to show you is just a snapshot of the different ambassadors across the different countries, you know, who are helping to drive action at the local level. So thank you so much for sharing that, and we look forward to hearing more on the Stay Alive and Thrive as we seek to, you know, drive action within the region. So at this point, I would like to open the floor for session 2, which will speak primarily to issues of climate change in the Caribbean region, particularly those that are at the forefront of the minds of our young people. So this is primarily a youth session, and we will be able to, you know, hear the perspectives of different young people representing different organizations. So again, we have a diverse group who will be able to, you know, share their perspectives, their ideas, and recommendations for the future. But before we delve into that particular session, we will at this moment hear from Renee Atwell, who is the Dean of the Caribbean Youth Ambassador Program. And Renee will speak to climate change and health youth action plan. So over to you as you share insights on this action plan.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Pleasant good afternoon and good evening to everyone who is here today. I'm really happy and excited to bring greetings on behalf of the CARICOM Youth Ambassador Corps. And of course, we do extend greetings to the Planning Committee and gratitude for inviting us to be part of the conversation on youth and climate action. I'm here today to share just a brief overview of the work that the CYA Corps has been doing and intends to do in the area of climate action, more particularly at the intersection between climate action and health. So the CYA Corps intends, or we are actually partnering with the Pan American Health Organization for the implementation of a project which is youth empowerment and participation, strengthening climate resilient health systems in the Caribbean. And Mrs. Bailey would have alluded to this project earlier on when she would have been presenting, and we are very happy to have PAHO as a partner providing us with that technical expertise and know-how and training that we would be able to execute projects in the area of climate change and health. And so of course this project that we are partnering with PAHO in is really part of a larger project, which would focus on, of course, strengthening climate resilient health systems in the Caribbean, being executed by partners such as CAFA, CDMA, as well as the UWI. And of course, many times we speak about climate change, sometimes we just narrow the conversation to the effects or impact that it has on the environment. But of course, we understand and appreciate that health systems are, are very much affected by the impact or the effects of climate change. Even if we look throughout the region, we see how as small island developing states, we are significantly affected by climate change. We are seeing extreme weather conditions, we are seeing more frequent and devastating hurricanes, excessive periods of drought, excessive rainfall, high sea level rises. And these are all things affecting us as small island developing states within the region, many of our economies being heavily dependent on tourism. And so when we are affected by these types of disasters and natural disasters, etc., it really affects us and our ability to adapt and our ability to deliver high quality health services to those within our population. And as a result of these things, the effects of climate change can obviously cause significant threat to our health, resulting in things like respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular diseases, and many other infectious diseases that can affect us living and working right here within the region. And as a result of this is really the background behind creating this project that is at the intersection of climate change and health, of course, which really aims to, one, increase awareness of climate change, and also, of course, to ensure that action is being taken and a One Health approach is being adopted to reduce the effects that climate change has on health. And of course, the CYA Corps will, as Mrs. Bailey would have said earlier, will be focusing on the area of climate change and health for the next 1 to 2 years. And each of our participating member states will be required to plan and execute projects in this area. So we have some of our participating member states executing projects such as green spaces for clean spaces, where they aim to promote mental and physical health by providing psychological relaxation and stress alleviation to battle and to reduce carbon emissions, to battle climate change. We have Adopt a Park community greening initiatives, which aims to raise awareness about the implications of climate change on health. We have Trash for Cash campaigns, which aims to educate young persons on how they can turn recycled projects into viable business ideas. And so what we intend to do really is to equip CARICOM youth ambassadors with the knowledge that they would need to execute their projects. Our goal at the end of the day would really and truly be to ensure that young persons can actually buy in and get into the conversation on climate change. Many times what you might hear is that young persons feel as if they really can't do anything at an individual level when it comes to climate change. They think it's an issue only for governments and only for large international organizations. But it's very important for young persons, to understand and appreciate that we can take little steps every day, that can actually help to reduce our carbon footprint and to help in the greater fight against climate change. And so, of course, the CARICOM Youth Ambassador Program and the core itself, we really do look forward to working with youth organizations throughout the region and helping to execute our project, adding to the conversation and to seeing how best we are able to utilize the limited resources that are available to help us execute this project. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation, and we're really happy to contribute to the conversation here today.
Thank you so much, for sharing. And, oftentimes when we think about climate change, there are areas such as agriculture that, that are often at the forefront of individuals' minds, infrastructure. And I'm particularly happy for the thrust, with engaging persons around the issues of climate change and health. And I do think that, this program that is being done through the ambassadors will help to hopefully bring awareness to the linkages and, the cross-sectional challenges that we continue to face where climate change is concerned. And, focusing on health, I think, is going to be particularly important. And I do look forward, to the rollout of these different projects that you mentioned, and, also utilizing youth as agents of change across these different communities. So thank you so much for sharing that. And again, the importance of collaboration and recognizing PAHO as our partner in this effort is going to be something that is quite important. So thank you so much, for bringing that to our attention. At this moment, I would like to open the youth session. And I'm particularly excited for this session because we have a lot to unpack, we have a lot to share, we have a lot to hear today as we speak to different representatives. And so I would like to use this opportunity to firstly introduce the members who will participate in this session. We have a representative from the Hay campaign, who is Ms. Stephanie Pascal, and she's out of Dominica. We have Dwayne Hendrickson, which is a Caribbean Youth Ambassador out of St. Kitts and Nevis. Christian Zakor, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, the UNFCCC Regional Facilitator for SIDS in the UNFCCC. Nixon Barry, who is the Regional Coordinator for the Caribbean at the Conference of Youth 16. Ferguson Valmont, who's a Caligano Youth Representative. Mr. Ashford Norris, Stay Alive and Thrive, a member of the Stay Alive and Thrive Ambassador Corps. And we hope to have a member of the Caribbean Regional Youth Council as well. So these are all the young persons who will be contributing in the session. And at this moment, I would like to open the floor to them to bring their short remarks before we delve into a very engaging and exciting plenary for our questions and answers. So I'd like to invite Ms. Pascal to the floor to bring her remarks, after which we will have Mr. Hendrickson. So Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Hi, good day, everyone. I just want to say thank you for inviting me on behalf of Hay to this platform to share my views. So I was asked to do a short presentation on the issues I feel that are most critical to young persons who want to advocate for climate change. Firstly, I think that is something that has been mentioned already, is the need for research. With research, we get more information, and information is very important. I feel another key ideal of research is that you also get policy advisement, right? So you're able to get suggestions and recommendations for policy, which is very critical if we are serious in actually implementing true change or seeing true change for climate change, right? Another issue I feel is very important as well is that the picture of what a climate activist is or what it should be before what you notice is that persons who are involved in climate change, they are typically persons who know the science behind it. They are persons who have done geography, they are environmentalists essentially. And I feel like that is a deterrent to a lot of young persons who want to advocate for climate change because they feel that they do not fit the criteria, they do not fit the bill. And so if we want to include more young persons in climate change, we need to really be more inclusive and we need to encourage more persons. Okay, yes, climate change, we need to know the science if we want to battle it. But we also need the economists and the financial people who will help us budget, you understand, against the different impacts of climate change. We also need the food specialists who will talk to us about food security and how that is a key issue. We also need the entertainers who will use their platforms because they are the ones that have access to the wider audience. So they will bring more traction to the issue of climate change. So yes, climate change, we need to know the science behind it, but it is such a multifaceted issue that we really need to be more inclusive. So we need to change what a climate activist is. And I think because before, for such a long time, it was typically just the people who studied the science behind it, who studied the effects of it. That was only really the people who were talking about it. And then everybody else kind of felt left out. So I feel that is the two main issues that we need to look at for young persons in the Caribbean who want to have an impact on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I will leave my comments for the end, given that I want all the youth reps to share their perspectives. So thank you so much, Ms. Pascal. Over now to our second presenter, Mr. Hendrickson. The floor is yours.
Good day, and again, thank you for this invitation to be a part of this very timely and very important conference. It is undebatable that the Caribbean depends heavily on its natural resources, such as the ecosystem, or the marine ecosystem, sorry. Our natural resources contribute significantly to our economy and our livelihoods. Henceforth, the promotion and protection of these resources is of paramount importance. So it's time for us to let us not forget that climate change has a way of interacting with other threats to increase the vulnerability of these natural resources. A perfect example could be the COVID-19 pandemic and the stress that it has had on our health. With the expansion of social media, now is the opportune time to saturate them with public awareness on climate action. Though this is something that we've heard time and time again, it's still a powerful and viable tool that we could use, and we should not get complacent with. Simple practices such as recycling here in the Caribbean, the avoidance of single-use plastics, promotion of renewable clean energy, and other individual solutions to climate action could all be circulated on these various social media platforms. While on this, we can further promote capacity building through NGOs or key stakeholders, partners, youth-led and youth-serving organizations to enhance human resources in environmental and natural resource planning, management, and sustainable utilization of these assets. I would quickly like to underscore a saying, keep that same energy. As young people, let us continue to take that same vibrant, ambitious, and dominating energy, and let us begin to channel it into climate protection and promotion. We have the voices and we've heard about it today, so we can unify, we could lobby and rally for various policies and the various legislative instruments and framework. Let us keep that same energy to undertake the implementation of strategies and projects to curb destructive practices that impact our natural resources and build resilience to the impending threats. Thank you.
I particularly like the different things that you share, but as I mentioned, I'll do a final wrap up at the end. Ms. Christian with us?
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today. I started in CYEN, so it feels like I'm giving back. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm the Small Island Developing States Regional Facilitator for the UNF Major Group of Children and Youth, which is the official mechanism for youth engagement in policy and governance to UNF. There was a typo in the description. It's not part of the UNFCCC, it's just UNF. So I just want to give a few comments on the issues that Caribbean youth will face in tackling climate change. We are rights holders of a future that's being eroded by the actions of the present. And it's in our best interest to ensure that the future we inherit is an equitable and sustainable one. There are many uphill battles that we face in tackling climate change, but these are some I consider most critical. And I've tried to arrange my thoughts into such a way that each one links into each other, because much like climate change, these social and governance issues are rarely ever one-dimensional. So to start, power policy and legislation. For many Caribbean countries, our policy and legislation might not have kept up with the times. They were created in a foregone era for the events of that period and have not been updated, or they're created in current times with tunnel vision, so they become outdated very quickly. I can certainly attest to that in Trinidad and Tobago, because several of our laws stem from colonial rule. So for example, we have a Conservation of Wildlife Act with a vermin list on it. And the vermin on the list are animals that can be freely hunted outside of the hunting season because they're considered to constitute a risk. So some of those animals, like parrots and fruit bats, they were on the list because under British rule, they're considered pets to agriculture. So farmers were given free rein to wipe them out. And that list persisted to current day. And it took a lot of advocacy work from local groups to remove several unduly sentenced animals from that list. Similarly, it was only last year that an insufficient and frankly appalling fine for animal cruelty was updated from 400 TT to 100,000 TT. And I'll return to this example at the end because I have some comments to make about it, or more about the principle behind it. So we also have a complacent attitude in the Caribbean. When we prepare for all variations of the future, it means being open-minded to all possibilities to anticipate the best and the worst. Our laid-back Caribbean attitude is a double-edged sword. Our ability to relax and take life as it comes is certainly enviable, but it also means that we may not care about the situation until it's at our doorstep. It translates into reactive government measures and an unprepared population. It translates into public perception of environmentalism as being resistant to development, and our leaders refusing to acknowledge that the climate change is a crisis. Stemming from complacency is ignorance. And I'll use ignorance both in the true sense of simply being unaware, and also in the trinity sense of being hard-headed. It's not a crime to be uneducated about something, and to know something is the first step to being prepared. However, as some of our advocates in the audience may well know, there will always be people who refuse to learn. It's our job to be patient with them, as it might come from being real stubborn and set in a particular way, but it can also come from simply having different priorities. It's unfair to expect people to care about floods in India or drought-related famine in Somalia, or even about sea level rise in 10 years on our densely populated Caribbean coast when they're struggling to put food on the table. And climate change can be an abstract concept sometimes. We can understand if rain falls today and that rain usually falls in some particular pattern, but relating different patterns to some anthropogenic stressor and greenhouse gases being emitted from some developed country is larger than most of us can comfortably grasp. Not everyone has the luxury of having a science-based education or advancing beyond primary or secondary school. Ultimately, all of these factors lead to a communication disconnect when youth try to tackle climate change. The future is one of teamwork and collaboration. And I'll extend my gratitude to the British High Commissioner, Ms. Cross, for mentioning this, but she's no longer here. Refusal to collaborate between advocates, between the public, even between government agencies and countries is setting a trap for ourselves. At the end of the day, everyone is in the same boat and we can't bail it out if someone keeps dumping water back in. And we have to work together to make sure everyone's accounted for. And Janelle noted this, she noted this from the survey, in that the Caribbean is severely limited in resources like land space and fresh water. So we have to work to share equitably among ourselves. Many hands make light work. Finally, meaningful involvement of youth in decision-making, which I think it's paramount to the future and sustainable development. Youth make up roughly 30% of the global population. To exclude youth is to exclude a significant stakeholder. If the latest IPCC report showed us anything, children, young, and future generations are at the center of this discourse and deserve to be represented in the discussion. It's not just about tokenistic inclusion, it's about truly listening to a prominent stakeholder and integrating their perceptions and recommendations. As much as it is important to recognize shortcomings and obstacles, I detest lingering on them. We must be solution-driven and learn how to translate obstacles into opportunities. A lesson I learned from a Canadian policymaker called Ed Whittingham is that the windows of opportunity are random and few, and you will miss the window if you're not prepared. I will call back the example of the animal cruelty fine. A team of animal rights activists and lawyers had been recruited to update the law from at least a year prior, and the draft amendments had been laid in Parliament to wait in Parliament limbo until whenever they came around to it. But it wasn't until a shocking hang of a black dog last year that galvanized the public and the sympathetic members of Parliament into action. And a month later, the updated bill was passed, which is it's a record because we have several draft bills that take years to pass, like the beverage container bill, which has been in progress for the last 10 years. Sometimes there isn't a niche into which youth can find a place, but there's nothing to say that we can't carve our own. Make your own opportunities. As a colleague of mine said, if there's no seat for youth at the table, we'll bring a folding chair. Be bold and provocative and don't let anyone walk all over you. Do not be a puppet and do not puppet people that eventually fails in the longer run. Value sincerity and integrity and be loyal to the cause. When they go low, you stay high. Learn from your mistakes and take responsibility for all your actions. We're humans and we have flaws, but it's important to keep moving forward. Don't be afraid to speak up and respectfully question. Be compassionate and understanding. This is a marathon, not a race, and everyone is fighting different battles. Most importantly, don't give up. Be resilient and steadfast in the face of adversity. Hope is all we have, and only you can leave your unique mark on the world. Make sure it's a good one. I will close with the UNFMGCY rallying cry, nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, for those words of encouragement. And, amidst the challenges that we continue to face, I'm happy that you mentioned that it's not a marathon. It's not a race, sorry, but a marathon. So, it's something that over time, we will hopefully be able to, see change being effected. So thank you so much for those thoughts. At this point, I will hand over to Mr. Barry for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Janelle. Pleasant morning to everyone. I'm going to keep this quite simple as I examine some of the issues facing young people or the youth sector as it relates to climate change in the region. One of the major things that we've seen is the underrepresentation of youth in matters relating to climate change and the environment. I think also the absence of climate change and the environment in youth policies. Youth policies are meant to guide the work of governments and youth serving agencies over a period of time. And over the years, what we've noticed is that policies are being developed and climate change and the environment is not part of it. You understand that this is very important because young people are most affected by climate change and the environment. And if we are not having the discussions around the table and putting it into the policies so that the resources and the energy can be given towards addressing the issue, then we are going nowhere very quickly. The slow introduction of jobs in the climate change and the environment sector, we've had a lot of discussion on that. There are a lot of scholarships available, but what do you do when you go out there and study a field relating to climate change and the environment? Where do you come back and fit in? That's a major issue that's affecting the sector. I believe that there is a major disconnect, and I think someone mentioned it before, there's a major disconnect between the big picture and the individual person. It's not far-fetched. I believe that it's all interconnected and we need to get our young people to understand just that. So whether it be climate change and health, climate change and food security, marine life, they're all interrelated. And what you do as an individual makes the difference. And I believe that has to be communicated to our young people. Let's not get too caught up in the major science and the discussions that are flying over our heads, but rather let's break it down to the grassroots level. And I'm waiting for when we begin the discussion on climate change and COVID-19. I think this one will be quite interesting. Youth participation at the local level, I believe that we need to get more young people on our committees, our climate change committees and environmental committees. Training for young people in areas of climate change and the environment. You want to go to a UNFCCC meeting, what are you going there to see? You must be ready, you must be trained, you must understand the concepts. And I believe that we need to organize at a local level to get our young people trained in these areas. Institutional strengthening for youth and community clubs in order to take advantage of climate financing. That's a major issue. We have all types of funding available, but when you look at the requirements for accessing that funding, young people don't have those. Club structures are not in place, clubs are not registered, and these are the simple things that we need to look at so that we can position our young people to take advantage of these initiatives. What can we do as young people? We need to organize ourselves and be a part of the advocacy process. We need to conduct the research as was done today and present it to the leaders, the stakeholders, so that they are aware that we know, and this is what we are saying, this is what the young people are saying. Of course, the colleague before me mentioned it. We need a seat at the table, we must demand it, and we must use it well. Not just get a seat, but when you get that seat, what do you do with it? That's what's important. Research the UNFCCC process, get involved in organizations such as CYEN, Youngo, and so forth, that are channeling and making a difference at the regional and international level. And finally, lead by example. Thank you.
Thank you as well, for those thoughts this afternoon. I will at this point hand over to Ferguson for his remarks.
Hello, good day. Thank you for having me. I believe that the indigenous people are being affected the most by climate change. These are some of the effects of climate change on the many youths of Kalnago youths and people based in Kalnago territory. Our way of life is disappearing. Our livelihoods and identities of our people depend heavily on our close relationship with nature. As the ecosystem and biodiversity is being destroyed, our habitats and traditions slowly fade away. Through lack of access to land, natural resources, and sustainable development, for example, our many herbs being used for medical purposes are now being extinct because of climate change. Our lack of access to safe drinking water because of rising temperatures and more frequent and intense rainfall can cause harmful bacteria, viruses, and algae to grow in our water supplies. This can cause illness if exposed to contaminated water, causing stress to all our existing water sources, therefore making potable water difficult to accommodate. Due to our close ties to land, indigenous people face great threats from the damage brought by climate change. Due to our mountainous terrains, it makes it easier for land slippage. Landslides caused by heavy rainfall are therefore being affected. And so is our fragile ecosystem, way of life, and infrastructure. The Kalnago people depend solely on the agricultural sector. With the changes of patterns in weather conditions, it's quite difficult for farmers of the Kalnago territory or indigenous people to practice or pursue knowledge or share knowledge down to the older generations. I believe that climate change is affecting Kalinago people. It will continue to affect Kalinago people. And it's our responsibility to help mitigate and reduce that issue for us all. Thank you.
For sharing the perspectives and the impacts that you consider climate change to be having on the Kalinago people. And finally, we will have Mr. Ashford Norris, who is our final presenter before we delve into our question and answer segment.
Okay, good. I believe it's afternoon now. Good afternoon to everyone. Well, at least where I'm sitting, it's afternoon. So pleasant day to everyone. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. So I'm really excited to be a part of this forum. My considerations or my recommendations are more targeted at the governmental level, because a lot of the things that a lot of the issues that we face when it comes to climate change and ourselves as youth, there's ever so much that we can do if we're not getting the support or the backing from the government and, you know, the people who actually make the decisions that we are being affected by. So I want to focus a bit more on, let's say, after a disaster-stricken community. My work in climate activism really started after Hurricane Maria in 2017 when it devastated Dominica. I really wasn't aware of all the effects of climate change. I really wasn't plugged into the conversation until that really gave me, you know, that jolt of just awakening at that moment. So for me, I took the burden upon myself to go look for information and to find out ways of how could this happen? This has never happened before. I always hear of my parents and so forth talk about Hurricane David that happened in the 1970s or so forth. That was the last major hurricane Dominica had. How could this happen today? So on the governmental level, thinking of youth after a disaster, how do the young people actually get resources? How do they help build back themselves better and stronger after a disaster? It's difficult already as it is as a young person to try to build a life of your own with the limited resources that you might be given if you're not coming from, let's say, one factor, which is generational wealth. If you're just a young person trying to build up yourself, you just perhaps took a loan to put, you know, foundation down to try to build a home. It probably wasn't where it was supposed to be at that point to be considered climate resilient. And now that entire structure has been broken down, and you still have to pay back the loan. You still have to finance the foundation to build back again. And that's just one of the many things that happen to you when it comes to trying to develop themselves in a developing country. We're all coming from small island developing states. So how do we help youth develop in a developing country when it comes to different things like climate change, setting us back time and time again? So my main thing is that I want there to be an open line of communication between the government and the youth. Don't just let the young people think and feel that you're taking in their consideration or you're taking in what they have to say, but let them know that it is being considered and it is being acted upon. Young people are affected. I like to say that no one thinks about the future more than the people who have to live there, the people who have to take up the challenges of the future. If I become a policy analyst, or a policy maker, I don't want to spend half of my day or majority of my day trying to uproot the policies that the other decision makers before me put there that are not being sustainable, that are not as beneficial. I don't want to spend my time trying to uproot these policies and put in new policies. I want to spend my time bolstering those efforts. I want to strengthen them. I want to show, okay, this is how it impacted the community before, but I want to go a bit further instead of trying to uproot all the negative impacts that it has placed on the community and try to build back from scratch. If it's one thing that the IPCC report has showed us, we don't have time to uproot and start from scratch. We don't have that luxury. Time is of the essence, and whatever we do today, we have to ensure that we can build upon it later in the future. So I want there to be an open line of communication between the government and the youth so that, you know, we can share information. The young people, we are enthusiastic. We came here on a Saturday today and we're talking about climate issues. We're enthusiastic about these topics, but it is one thing to talk about it, but not have the resources to be able to take it further. The government themselves, they may not have the resources, but you have the linkages, you have the connections. Put us in connection with these different organizations. Just upon myself and my work with the UNDP and so forth, from about since 2017. Today, I am a delegate to the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition conference that's going to take place next month. I'm a country coordinator for COI 16, and it's young people are enthusiastic. They want to be in the conversation. They want to be a part of the dialogue. They want to help. It is your job as decision makers and the people who have these connections to facilitate that enthusiasm, to nurture it. Don't let them feel that, you know, the enthusiasm is going to waste. Let them see that what they're saying is being implemented and it's being acted upon. So apart from, you know, the open line of communication, and the sharing of resources, let there be a greater partnership. The main thing that I've been hearing on this call since this morning, it's about partnership and collaboration. Sustainable development goal number 17, it's all about partnerships for the goals. So I think the main thing that I really want to leave with everyone here this morning or this afternoon is that let there be a greater partnership among ourselves. Don't just feel that I have this amazing climate change idea and I want to keep it to myself because I want my organization to be the organization to bring it forward. That is very selfish and it's not going to get us anywhere, to be very honest. What we need to do is share our ideas with each other. Even in this forum that we have, it's facilitating or it's fostering for greater Caribbean integration. And this is what we want to do. This is where we want to reach out. So this is my contribution for this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ashford, for sharing that. Just sitting and listening here to the different perspectives shared, you know, by the different youth participants in this segment have, you know, reiterated a lot of the things that I, as a youth activist myself, have, you know, thought and had to contend with, but it also kind of brought additional perspectives that don't necessarily often, you know, emerge at the forefront of our minds. And just to summarize some of those key messages coming out of the sessions is the idea expressed that, you know, a lot of the things, particularly as it relates to traditional knowledge among the Kaligana people, their medicines and their practices, these are being lost to climate change. And so a part of their culture and their identity, things that, you know, help them to identify as, you know, people within that space are being lost. And of course, that poses a challenge, particularly as it relates to, you know, transitioning and dissemination of information from one generation to the next. So for me, that is something that is important that I thought, you know, was well expressed. The idea that Ashford just spoke about having that open line of communication and, you know, promoting the idea for collaboration and partnerships is also something that I think is particularly important. The idea that where research is concerned, there are different gaps that exist, and, you know, we need to ensure that information fills these gaps, and the information that is being requested seeks to not just end up in a report or not just, you know, end up being something that is disseminated to partners, but also something that helps to address a lot of the issues that are happening locally and regionally. So I think that is also something that was important. The importance of amplifying information and amplifying, you know, educational opportunities, particularly where awareness is concerned, reducing the use of single-use plastics, channeling our energies into more targeted actions. The idea that a lot of the challenges are rarely unidimensional, but they are all interconnected. And so we must recognize that in addressing one challenge is also an opportunity to address, you know, other challenges in other areas and other sectors. Is also something that is quite interesting and important when we think about climate change and our approach to climate action. It was rightly said by Christian that climate is often something that is abstract, something that, you know, as a person, when you hear greenhouse gas emissions and you hear about these different pollutants, again, if you do not have a science background, it might be something that's very convoluted, and of course you end up leaving the conversation with nothing. So again, the importance of communication and framing our messages to our audiences will be quite critical. How do we, you know, curate our messages in a way that we reach different audiences and, you know, make it simplistic enough that irrespective of the background that you do have, you are able to leave understanding what the challenges are, understanding what the solutions are, you know, understanding what needs to be done to be able to garner useful action. When we think about the idea that if we miss the window of opportunity, that we can in fact, you know, miss the window of opportunity if we're not prepared, that is something that I think is also important. The idea of having support from decision makers is something that is critical. And, you know, it was said that we need to keep it simplistic. Nixon said it when he said we need to keep it simplistic. Oftentimes we try to make the conversations too technical and then we end up leaving with no sort of key concrete decisions or key concrete steps forward. So in keeping it simple, we seek to make the right connections and, put youth in the right direction and, help them to understand what the next steps are and how they can get involved. And of course, the final point that I want to reiterate at this moment is that it is important to not just have a seat at the table and become, as we in the Caribbean often call, bench warmers or seat warmers, but people who utilize that opportunity to our benefit. When given a seat at the table, what is it that we want, these policy makers and these decision makers to hear from us? What is it that they want? What is it that we want them to prioritize, particularly through a youth lens and from a youth perspective? What has been our experience on the ground, and how do we then, translate a lot of that into things that we can create policies, programs, and projects around? And so, in just sitting and listening, I think that this is very rich information that will, in fact, not just remain here, but we want to be able to put it in a statement that will, further be disseminated and shared with other individuals and stakeholders. I'll speak a little bit more to that closer to the end, but at this moment, I would like to open the floor for questions to our panelists. I would like to ask the first question before any of the other members of the audience go about that. And so, we're currently in a pandemic, we have been in a pandemic, and we don't know how long we will be in this pandemic. And so the question that I'd like to pose to all the panelists is, how can we take action to make a difference during the pandemic when we recognize the influx of single-use masks, when we look at the face shields, when we look at all these different items that are very important and are being touted as important, particularly in helping to reduce the spread of COVID, it's also producing a plastic problem. And so my question to everyone is, how do we take action, make a difference during the pandemic, while still staying true to our vision and our mission for, promoting recycling and reducing the use of single-use plastic? Ashfred, it seems to be ready and waiting. So Mr. Norris, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I think the first thing that I want to say is that in order for us to really combat the pandemic, we have to keep on practicing the things that, will assist us in this time. So, the social distancing, the proper hand and respiratory hygiene, because the only way that we're gonna, move out of this pandemic is if we take action and we're responsible. So after we've completed that, then we need to keep on this, this environmentally conscious mindset. Don't just think that, okay, I have this mask and if I lose it, if I forget it, I can simply get another one. Or if it falls somewhere, you just leave it where it fell. Take the mask, throw it in the trash bin, be responsible, be an active participant in the conversation. Let's not just talk about it, but let's act as well. So apart from being responsible in that way, another thing, one way that I really promote, or something that I really promote doing is, having dialogues like this. Like recently, I did a climate talk series in about like 8 to 10 primary schools with young children from ages like 6 to 12. And one thing that I learned is that they were very knowledgeable when it came to climate change, but they were not really knowledgeable on how they can help to fight against climate change. So something I told them to do, just take your phone, your mother's phone, your daddy's phone, put it there. Everyone has a TikTok account, everyone has a social media platform. Start the conversation, start a live, do TikTok videos that really resonate with your friends so that they can be more knowledgeable that, this is an issue, but there's still a way that I can fight against it. I might not be able to, transition into 100% renewable energy. I might not be able to, I might not be able to cut down emissions like the way that I want to right now, but there's simple, small things that I can do. So I feel like that's one way that we can keep being responsible in this time, practicing all the proper protocols and procedures that the health authorities have been admonishing us to do, and as well taking that responsibility upon ourselves to be socially responsible and environmentally responsible.
Thank you for that contribution, Ashfred. Who would like to go next?
I think I can jump in here and add to what Ashford would have mentioned earlier. Something that I have been promoting locally here amongst my peers and friends, et cetera, is that if you can invest in a reusable mask where you could wash every 2 days or whatever have you, make the investment now, because again, it goes back to you taking that individual action towards protecting your environment and avoiding pollution, these kind of stuff. Because I mean, sometimes when you walk through the different towns and what's not, you always find the drains littered with mask. Again, it flies off. You tell yourself, hey, I can get the next one. So you leave it and you don't properly dispose it. In the same breath, we're dealing with a pandemic, and you want to dispose waste such as the mask that you use in a proper way. So we need to also add the proper disposing to the campaigns out there when you talk about the social distancing and what's not. At the same time, again, dispose your mask properly and or invest in a reusable mask.
Thank you so much for that, Dwayne. Do we have any other contributions for this particular question?
Hi. So I agree with the previous speakers. More so too, I just want to say that this pandemic, one of the benefits that has definitely come out of it is the increased use of technology. So just our ability here to facilitate this conversation. I mean, yes, we had Skype and we had Zoom before, but we were not really utilizing them as much as now. So I feel one of the good things out of this pandemic is that now there's increased communication, there is a wider audience, and we can really reach much more people and spread the word of climate change further than we have ever been able to before.
Thank you, Stephanie. I see that we have 2 hands raised, Sufain and Ria. Sufain, please go ahead. And then Ria, you can go after Sufain.
Hi, Janelle. My question is basically based on something I think is highly overlooked, especially in the Caribbean nations, because we oftentimes speak as though, well, it's a simple task to just be an advocate, be an activist, and so on. But there is this fear of victimization, and sometimes danger is attached to fighting for a cause. And especially, I can attest it, like sometimes I would not venture off into social media and say certain things because I may eventually need a scholarship from the same entity or government that I am going to want to oppose a decision that they made and so on. So I'm asking, what is the best way to approach a situation? For instance, I can give an example. We would have reversed a legislation that we had in Guyana to allow old cars that are like more than 10 years old to be imported into Guyana due to, of course, we know the emissions and so on. And recently that legislation was removed, and you're now allowed to bring these old cars that pollute the environment much more and so on. And out of fear of victimization, I did not, well, go to social media, create videos and so on. And so what would you give, the panelists can be able to tell me, what's the best way to approach such a situation? What would be their advice in order to avoid the victimization and the fear that surrounds certain things that activists would want to do, especially when it comes to social media?
Thank you for that question, Sufain. And just to interject quickly, that is something that a lot of young persons in Jamaica also speak to. Recently, we would have done a campaign around youth for Puerto Bueno that wanted to stop mining in an area that we considered, as having as an endemic species. And there was some backlash. And I had a friend who basically met some amount of, I don't want to speak too much to what happened, but she was basically reprimanded because of her engagement in that particular campaign. So I think this is something that is quite interesting, and it's something that we would like to hear from some of the panelists as to what their particular stance is where that is concerned. So I will now open the floor for the response to Sufain's question. Thanks for that question, Sufain.
I believe that I can start off. So the main thing that I want to highlight, especially in this fight against climate change, is that you are never alone. So when it comes to, activism and so forth, if you feel that you don't want to be like the face case of the campaign or something like that, it's simple that you can go to, an NGO also for us, or an organization that represent the same interests, and bring your case before them. Some of all the Caribbean islands, we have the National Youth Councils, we have, the UN organizations such as UNDP, and different organizations that are out there who are willing to assist and help you. So if you feel like you don't want to be the face case of the campaign, you don't want to be the face case of the issue, then you can go to this organization, show that, we have a pool of young people behind us who are ready to support this initiative. And I believe that once you bring your case to them and they're ready to support it, then you can take the fight to the next level.
Fred, do we have any other perspectives on the matter?
I agree with Norris in terms of using established organizations to try and get your voice, get it forward. And sometimes I think also we have to make a choice, and it's how we say certain things that matters. So we can say the same thing in a very nice way to get our point across. So I think we can also use that. Say it very nicely, very politely, but still get the message across very effectively. In certain instances, you cannot get away from victimization, because as soon as you begin to say the simplest thing, people believe that you are anti-government and you are anti-this. So I believe sometimes at the end of the line, it's about us taking a stand and what we're willing to sacrifice. Because we're not alone, as Norris correctly said. Sometimes we have to make a stand if it's going to affect us. And I believe that law that you just spoke about, in terms of the importation of vehicles, that law was implemented in Grenada a few years or last year somewhere, about where vehicles over 10 years are not allowed to be imported. So one country is implementing, another one is revoking. Is the hypocrisy in the system? And having discussions like these, open discussions on panels where it's not just you making the point, but a group of people speaking the same language, and then you'll begin to see momentum, I guarantee you, because they know it's wrong. They know it's self-serving, because these are the same people that are on one side of the mouth talking about the importance of the environment and how to reduce this and that and the other. So I think having these open dialogues would definitely help.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Nixon. So I have one final question that I'd like to have all the panelists participate in. So as I had mentioned, we would have, during the registration, asked individuals to share specific questions that they would like to be answered during the session. And so there were a lot of concerns, particularly as it relates to the current actions and the current initiatives and programs that are being promoted both across countries as well as regionally. And so my question to you this morning, afternoon, night is, what do you consider to be the two most important priorities as we seek to advance action for change? In your opinions, what are those two things that we need to prioritize moving forward in order to advance climate action, particularly for small island developing states? This is the final question that we will have before we have the official close and vote of thanks. So I'd just like to give you this opportunity to give your final remarks.
Can you repeat the question, please? It's raining heavy and can barely.
Okay. So the question is, what do you consider to be the two most important things that need to be prioritized as we seek to advance climate action in small island developing states? And then Stephanie has her hand raised. So Stephanie, please go ahead.
Okay, so can you hear me? Okay. So I believe, again, research, and I also believe that policy as well. So yes, educating persons is important, and yes, trying to get people to do the right thing naturally is obviously the most ideal situation, but at the end of the day, we definitely need laws, and we definitely need policy to govern people's actions, because most persons just aren't environmentally conscious as we would like them to be. And so we definitely need laws to really ensure that their actions will not be so detrimental to the environment. And importantly, these laws or these policies need to be built from research. We cannot just implement policy based on how we feel. It definitely needs to come out of the research. And so I feel those are the two most important actions we have to take if we really want to further climate change.
Thank you, Stephanie. Christian, you have the floor. Me, right? Okay, I'm speaking. So I agree that the laws and policies are the first step, but the second step is the data collection, because it's very difficult to support a policy if you don't have proof that it's working. And especially I'm in the sciences, I'm doing my master's in biodiversity and conservation, so I'm very aware of the science going on in a lot of these processes. And you need data, and we don't have a lot of it. The second priority that I would say is that we need to reframe the way that we relate to the environment, because the environment is not an obstacle. It's not something that we can't, it's the place where we live, it's our home. We have to have respect for it. But at the same time, we also have our own development to think about. So we need to start seriously considering sustainable development that puts economy, society, and environment on the same level, and not just economy above everything else. Thanks. Thank you for that contribution, Ashfred.
Okay, so I feel for me the two most pressing issues at this moment would be one, access to resources, and the next one would be really, I don't want to go back to what I said earlier on, but that communication with the decision makers. So the access to resources, like you might have the project writers, or you might just be someone with a great concept, a great idea, but you don't really know how to develop it. So how do you get in contact with an organization or someone who can really help you develop that idea? Or how do you get funding to bring that idea into fruition or implementation? So access to resources, having these NGOs or these climate change focused organization with an open door policy for anyone to feel like they're welcome to come in and discuss their ideas and discuss their recommendations or solutions. And the next one would be the access to the governments or the people who make the decisions. It is one thing I feel like I don't want to sound controversial at this point, but I feel like you shouldn't only know the youth at the time where it's like election time or so forth. You shouldn't only know to knock on their doors and stuff like that, to talk to them around those periods only. We're here all year round. Our locations don't change that often. So you know where we are and you know how to get into, and that just shows that you know how to get in contact with us. So when it comes to climate solutions and driving these policies, and when you want the youth input, you have a channel that you've already established, that you know how to get to the youth. So utilize it, use it more often, and get the youth participation and get the involvement. So just to recap, I feel like access to resources and access to the decision makers and the policy makers.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Nixon.
Thank you. I believe we need people at the center. Very important. We need people at the center. I say we need a social climate revolution. We need PEF, secondly, policy, evidence-based programming, and finance. So these are the two things I would put out. People at the center, the social climate revolution, and the policy, evidence programming, and finance. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, as I would have mentioned earlier, there is need for capacity building amongst the NGOs. That is something the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors in St. Kitts and Nevis is something that we were trying to do in terms of getting NGOs trained and sensitize them about climate action, protection, and promotion. And then that would translate into different projects surrounding the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely capacity building. And it was mentioned earlier about data collection. That is something that is fundamental, and greater collaboration between all the partners and the stakeholders to share these data so that, you know, we're not trying to beat the same horse. We all have the same mission. We all have the same vision. Let us all just continue to work together, foster greater collaboration amongst all the entities throughout the region.
Thank you so much for that. And then finally, we have Ferguson.
I would go back to what Ashford said. The two main priorities would be collaboration and resources. It's better together, greater. I mean, you can't do it by yourself. So collaboration with different NGOs and organizations, and internationally and regionally would be very important. And also the resources to go with it would lead to a successful climate change awareness in the future, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry. So we've heard, you know, from our panelists and the activities or the factors that they consider to be most critical moving forward, particularly, you know, for advancing climate action in small island developing states. And I would just like to use the opportunity at this moment to say, you know, we would have attended this afternoon's tonight's session, and we would have heard, you know, the results of the survey. We've also heard the perspectives of different actors, PAHO, the UNFCCC, the FCDO, all these different entities that are currently working in the Caribbean. And then of course, we've also heard the perspectives of our young Caribbean youth and, you know, how they foresee youth being engaged in the climate space, as well as the different factors that they consider to be important for advancing current and future action. And, you know, from these conversations, we will now hope to compile and put together what we consider to be a Caribbean Youth Statement on climate action. And this is expected to, you know, make concrete recommendations to local and regional governments on the way forward from a youth perspective, and not just an individual entity or an individual group, but a collective, you know, youth statement. And we are hoping that, you know, upon finalization, we'll be able to disseminate to all the attendees, to all the individuals who would have participated and contributed for their feedback and, you know, that stamp of approval. Another thing that I'd like to state is that we spoke today about the need for a hub and, you know, that a space where youth are able to access different opportunities, different conversations. And so the CYEN will be developing a mobile app that is hoped to be launched soon, and that will help to, you know, fill this gap, particularly where this hub is concerned. And so we look forward to that as well. And then finally, as it relates to next steps, I'd like to encourage individuals to sign on the Stay Alive and Thrive campaign, which you would have heard somewhat about. It is on the website, and it will be updated as we progress with different mechanisms and different updates for you to engage with. So as it relates to the way forward, those are kind of the three things that I'm encouraging individuals to look out for. We will be in dialogue following this particular event. As I said before, it is just one step, or it's just one activity in the grand scheme of things, and, you know, a small piece of the puzzle that each of us has to contribute to. So for me, I look forward to, you know, the continued engagement. And just to close and to provide a kind of vote of thanks to all those individuals who took the time out, I want to say that, you know, I think we came, we saw, and, you know, we provided opportunities for persons to share. And now here we are at the end of, you know, today's virtual staging of the Caribbean Youth for Climate Action Conference. And I'd like to firstly thank the team at the FCDO for their collaborative efforts in this venture. We're happy for the support, and we look forward to, you know, for future collaborations, particularly as it relates to engaging youth in climate change conversations. To the CYEN's team behind the scenes, including Mr. Burt, Mr. James, and all the other members who contributed. Your hard work has paid off, and I'd like to say well done to Ms. Bailey, to Mr. Bateng and Mr. Manning, to everyone who contributed to the conversation. Amma, thank you so much for sharing all those perspectives. We're happy that all of you were able to join us. So everybody, our youth champions, our fellow change makers, thank you for your continued work in your individual organizations, you know, for the collaborative kind of work that you continue to do. It is very important as we continue to advocate for change in the face of climate change. And of course, to our attendees and to our participants, thank you for registering, joining, and participating. The event, of course, would not have been possible without you. And again, we are happy you took the time to attend. As I said before, this is only the end of one event and the work continues, and the baton has now been passed to you all to go back and continue the work in your organizations, schools, and communities, continue to teach, continue to engage and be engaged, and spread awareness as we seek to continue to collaborate, communicate, and collaborate for climate action. My name is Janelle Tomlinson. It was a pleasure moderating this afternoon's event. Please check your emails as we'll be sending updates on the different activities that we seek to engage in, as well as the fact that we will be sharing updates on the CYEN's website. So look out for those as well. Thank you so much. Continue to be safe. Continue to practice social distancing. Wash your hands, and please wear your reusable masks. Everyone, again, enjoy the rest of your Saturday, depending on what time it is. And we do hope that you will continue to fight the good fight as we seek to advance climate action in the cities and beyond. Thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of the day.